Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would sit down and do a video for you guys and gals. Let me get a sip of my water first. Get my radio voice going and let's talk about this. All right, something that I've had people comment on, they're like, you've said stuff about bro diets, you've said stuff about bro splits recently, over the last couple of years. And they're like, it sure seems like a lot of the bros who the evidence-based guys often made fun of sure got a lot of things right. You know what? They did, and I think this is something that we have to acknowledge. And I think it's important for us to understand a lot of the stuff that was done in the lifting world, powerlifting world, bodybuilding world, all these communities for years, they were in the trenches trying to always be the best. And they experimented and did a lot of stuff and observed what it did. They did the best that they could without measurements. And here's the thing, a lot of times they did things that they got right, they just got the reasons wrong. Therefore, it's broscience, right? In other words, so if you come up with, you see that the sun is yellow, and you maybe come up with some hypothesis that's completely ridiculous as to why it's yellow, and then science looks at it and says, well, it's yellow for a different reason. You're not wrong that it's yellow, you're just wrong in the reason that it happened. And only because you didn't have the scientific knowledge to know actually why. And I think this is something we have to admit when it comes to lifting culture. We have to admit this. A lot of times they got stuff really, really right years ago. They just misunderstood the mechanism behind it. So a lot of times when we even have found some of these contradictions, we get some preliminary data that says, well, it looks like the higher frequencies might cause a better muscle protein synthesis, but then newer studies find that it doesn't actually cause muscle growth difference. It's like, okay, maybe they're onto something. We look at different stuff with bro diets. People are like, oh, we can do this and flexible dieting, and you can eat much higher fat, but then you go look at some of the bro diets, chicken, brown rice, broccoli, right? The traditional bro type diet. I'm not saying that's all they ate, but the diet's built around that, which tend to be very high in high satiety carbs and vegetables, a lot of carbohydrates, a low fat, a lot of lean protein. And it worked. And usually a lot of them are like, well, if we're going to add fat, we'll add salmon or fish in, some, again, very healthy fats, if they're adding any fats historically. And that worked great. But then, you can't people in, well, it turns out really it's just calories in and out. But then here's what do you find? Recovery is still better on these higher quality diets. Satiety is better. And what do we find? We don't store carbs as body fat. If we go off all the newest data and don't try to look at some of the rodent studies and some of this old junk garbage research, we are finding now conclusively humans are not really gaining body fat from carbohydrates. It's coming from fat that we eat. And yes, calories in, calories out matter, but even some of the foods, even different carbohydrate sources have a different thermic effect. They have a different satiety effect. Okay? In other words, 1,000 calories from brown rice versus say 1,000 calories from table sugar do not have the same calorie output on the thermic end. Your body has to break down the brown rice differently. It will use energy even breaking it down. You're going to have better appetite control. So it's not even about the insulin or any of that. So you start looking at these things and you realize they still got a lot of stuff right. And people are like, oh, it's the calories or it's the carbs, it's not the fat you eat. When these guys had enough common sense to look at it and set back then, they realized, probably easier for the body to turn fat into fat than it is to turn other stuff into fat, right? That would almost be common sense without any data. If you had no studies to look at, a person might reasonably conclude that. But then we got into all this different data and debates and everything else about de novo lipogenesis and the insulin obesity hypothesis, and guess what? Turned out none of it was really true. The original bro hypothesis is right, and even in the situations where carbohydrates are stored as fat, guess what? You waste energy doing it. It requires calorie expenditure to even do it. Plus you have all the extra thermic effect from the carb overfeeding when it happens, so on and so forth. And when you go back and look at some of the bro stuff, you go, but these people all got great results. I mean, look back historically and look at bro training. Oh, they know you could just squat 3 times a week. You'll have great legs. Don't they just know all you need is this and that, right? But then you go back and look, and it's like, they're all like, yeah, we need to work each muscle from different angles. We really need to make sure we get a deep stretch on muscles. We need to do this. We need to train a muscle hard. Then if we just give it a week to recover, sorry guys, my nose is just, give it a week to recover, what happens? We all grow really well. You need to train to failure. Or what are we finding? Training really close to failure does produce the best muscle growth. Not saying to failure works, but they kind of figured that out. If you get really, at least get real close to failure, set per set, you don't need nearly as many sets to get fantastic muscle growth. They kind of figured this out. Did they all get results? They did. They built great physiques. Some of the greatest physiques in history were built using those sort of ideas. Same thing with the dieting. Oh, the bro diets. But they work. How many guys bulked and stayed lean while bulking, while eating that way? How many guys got contest ripped, absolutely shredded while eating that way? A ton of them. It all worked. So while we're standing around and we've been saying this, and a lot of the evidence-based people are like, oh, this bro stuff, don't they know better? Well, they didn't always have the reasons right. They didn't know the mechanisms behind the things. They oftentimes said, well, it's working because of this and that. And it would be complete nonsense. Oh, the brown rice has a lower, whatever, insulin responsiveness. That's literally not the reason. Okay? They didn't know the reasons why a lot of these things worked. They didn't understand the mechanisms in the body, but they figured out that it worked. And here's the thing that we have to remember. When you look at a lot of the evidence-based fitness people at the end of the day, and you compare them to a lot of the bros, on average, who's bigger, who's stronger, who's more jacked? And I hate to say this as someone who loves logic, who loves science, who loves reason. A lot of the bros were doing a lot better, particularly when I first came into the scene, right? A lot of the evidence-based people, they were using that almost as a cop-out. To not train hard, to eat like crap. As long as I hit my macros, it'll be fine. To train lazy, like I'm training smarter. So they would just train lazy. Okay? And at the end of the day, a lot of them got a lot less results. So when we look at these things, it's very important to understand that in that context. Okay? The bros did great. They often got a lot of things right, and I mean a lot of things right. They just didn't understand why it worked, but they knew that it worked. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys and gals next time.